but I do want to stick to the institution of media.
Let's do it.
People on the internet, people my generation say, we don't trust the institutions. We shouldn't trust the institutions. Well, I want to flip that. Do they trust us? And I think that's the bigger problem. We're not supposed to trust the institutions. If you trust government, man, if you're relying on government to save you, look around. It's not coming from anybody. But do the institutions trust us? And how can we get them to trust us? Because news media organizations, yes, it is beneficial for them financially to not tell us the truth and to stir anger and hate and all this stuff. But their higher ups and people who feed them information, they don't trust us with the truth at all. So I think that's the bigger problem. That kind of goes unannounced and unaddressed. What do you think?
There's a really interesting book that was written back when I was just finishing up with grad school at Berkeley. The guy at the same kind of age as me was getting his PhD in the geography department. And we all were in awe because, first of all, he was this brilliant guy. He was a great writer. He was also an artist. And his PhD dissertation, he sold it to Penguin Random House as like a real book before he was even done with his degree. The book is called Blank Spots on a Map. And it asks the question, what can we know about secret government programs from the outside without breaking any laws, by understanding that even secret government programs occupy the same world we do, so they follow the same laws of physics, which means they exist in space, they reflect light, things of that nature. So the book at one level is a story about him piecing together what he can about secret pilot plane, test plane programs, Groom Lake and Tonopah Test Range and things of that nature, Area 51, all the way through to Keystone spy satellites and secret government programs in the budget and things. It's just really cool. It's just an interesting read. But his basic question is, how much secrecy should a democracy tolerate, right? Do the people need to know everything?
No.
Or because at some level we've accepted the claim that, listen, there's some things you can't know about, you shouldn't know about, right?
Right.
And I think he's asking a super interesting question. And as somebody who spent, almost a decade of my life bouncing around dangerous, faraway places, in and out of war zones and things of that nature, where both our military and the others were engaged in, sometimes nefarious activities and things, I think that's an interesting question to ask. How much are we collectively as human beings willing to tolerate secrecy as a way of organizing, as an organizing principle of government? I don't have a very good answer to this, and Trevor, who wrote that book, knows a lot more and has gone a lot deeper into that question. But I think, Will, you touch on the core issue. Really do. You nailed it.
Let me take a stab at that.
Yeah.
In terms of secrecy. So you gave speeches at the UN, right? The UN.
Well, I wrote it. I didn't end up delivering it. The person who was appropriate to do the speaking did the speaking.
Okay, so you wrote a speech for the UN. So it's like international law, right? There is international law that exists. It's just impossible to enforce. So in terms of secrets, as long as you are in the bounds of those international laws and you don't break those laws, you can keep your secrets. We don't need government, like nuclear codes, where they're held, certain things with the military, whatever, can be kept. But like lunch orders are top secret nowadays, whatever. But if they're breaking the law, it can be kept top secret, but it's also should be known, and there should be no punishment for if that's known. So secrecy should be within the bounds of international law, and when it comes to like war overseas.
Okay, now I think you're on your way to make an interesting point, but I want to throw a little wrinkle in.
Please.
So international law, as it is currently defined and enforced, is about the relationship between nation states. And it's a product of originally the League of Nations and then the United Nations compacts and so on, in which the signatories to these compacts are in fact governments. So here's where the real thing gets muddy, because international humanitarian law, which is about the rights between states, the relationship between states, maintains this principle of sovereignty at its heart, which is to say that the legitimate state government, and here they mean national government, right, has the right to act with impunity within its own territory. So now what do you do when, as in Sudan, where I spent a long period of time, the government itself And I mean, Sudan today is, a perfect example of where this stuff breaks down. But I'm talking about 20 years ago. The government is funding paramilitary groups that are slaughtering civilians. So international law in that regard, sure, human rights law can kick in, but then we have, the pragmatic reality of the Human Rights Council and the UN Security Council, where you've got U.S., Britain, France, China, and Russia, and only one time in the history of the Security Council were they unanimous on something, which was the case of Iraq in 1990, which is entangled with my own story in a way. We won't get to it right this second. But that's the only time they ever agreed on something. They imposed sanctions on Iraq. So what do you do when governments are flaunting generally acceptable principles of how you should treat civilians, right? Like, nobody thinks it's a good idea to be slaughtering women and children, right? However, this happens all the time, and it happens with impunity because it's happening inside the borders of a sovereign state. So there has been a movement for a good 20 years now called Responsibility to Protect, which is basically trying to rework some of the underlying principles and say, well, what if we could agree something that would keep that from happening? But that's sort of stuck. So your premise is not wrong. It's just the containers to which it's applied are nation states.
Well, let me take a stab at that too then.
Which brings a problem.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that too. So,
all right.
Example. Obama, Trump, and to some extent Bush killed countless of innocent people in Iraq, Afghanistan through drone strikes.
Well, this started earlier, so don't leave Clinton out. Don't leave Clinton out. By the way, and I would just
I'll say
why this is important. Why this is important is everybody blames Bush for this doctrine of regime change in Iraq. That was a Clinton administration doctrine. Madeleine Albright was the first one to ever use the phrase in a speech, and then Clinton made it the official policy of the Clinton administration in October of 1998 and started bombing Iraq in December of 98.
Let's even go back further to Vietnam, right? All the presidents since Eisenhower, right? So they broke international law. Now, should another state, another government, another country dictate over us? No, you can't do that. And you can't impose your will. But what
that's the definition of sovereignty, and I think we have to ask ourselves whether we're willing to accept the price tag of that concept.
But the information needs to be released to the American public because it is being done in our name with our money, taxpayer money. So that information needs to be made public through a media so we can vote them out or convict them on our own. You can't rely, when it comes to international law, there is no power above them. They're technically, these theoretically, all equal. Like, who are we to go into another country and be like, hey, you're breaking international law, we're going to punish you? No. You can't do that. The citizens of that democracy, or whatever nation state you have, need to be the one punishing the politicians and the military people because it's done in their name with sometimes their money, specifically in the U.S. So that is how it needs to be done, at least properly. Because
theoretically, you're not wrong.
In a perfect world, that's how I would.
But there's a couple other things. So, like, for example, if we were talking about societies with full-blown execution of democratic practices, then maybe a free press. Again, all these things, they line up really nicely on paper. Yeah. Where a really free press is essential as a way of educating people in a political system where their vote can make a difference and change things. Like, all that at the level of sort of theory and ideology, it's great, right? It's a little bit like saying, well, I think democracy is a good idea if it were to actually exist.
Correct.
So going back to something you said a minute ago, I don't want to leave off what you just said, but I want to bring in something you said a little bit ago. Do they trust us? Well, the answer is clearly no, because here would be the simple test. If you trusted the citizens to make decisions, then voting would be the easiest and most automatic thing on earth. Right?
Yeah.
You would be able to vote anywhere at any time, just as you can file your taxes anywhere, anytime, online, whatever. The government has no problem knowing who I am in order to accept my income tax payments for myself and my S corp, right? And I can do that all online. Like, I don't have to see anybody. They're not checking my ID. I mean, they are, but in an electronic way, right? If we really cared about democracy, we would make it easy for every qualified adult person to vote, right? And I know there would be some debate about qualified, but we would have that debate, and then it would be done. Voter registration would be automatic.
Yep.
Election day would be a national holiday.
Yep.
Whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know.
100%. Yeah.
And you look at the amount of effort put into making that hard, rigging the rules, changing the district, like at every possible level, it's clear.
Not allowing debates
there's a threat.
for more political candidates.
There's a threat.
Yeah.
So, and I don't care, again, listeners, I don't care which party you vote for. This is not my point. It's not good for any of them. Right? Nobody, the corporate Democrats are just as bad as everybody else. This is not good. So we, the people, at some fundamental level, ought to be going, hey. Like, how is this okay? But again, this comes back to who has the time and the wherewithal, the actual economic means to get engaged in these issues, right?
Right.
Well, not a lot of folks.